Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome back to the show. I was getting a kick out of that music. Welcome. I am Dr. Dwayne Wood. That's Wood with an E, and the E stands for endocrinology. Here on this channel, I help to educate you, empower you, and encourage you to take charge of your health and life and go to the next level. We on this channel are so excited that you're here tonight. Hopefully you had a great weekend and you had a good day today on Monday. Tonight we're talking about hypoglycemia. Hypoglycemia, one of those important things that we hear often with diabetes, but as we're gonna learn tonight, it doesn't have to be diabetes. Some other things can cause hypoglycemia as well. We're going to do that tonight. We are going to spend some time talking about that, answering questions, and then going from there. So welcome. We are glad that you are here. And if you're out there, if you are new to the channel, go ahead and put new in the comments. We would love to engage with you. We would love to see you. We would love to hear from you. If you have a question, go ahead and put the question in the comments, and go ahead and put a Q in front of that question so that we know that it is a question that we need to get to. Okay, so glad that you're here. We got some hand claps that we're going to give for people who show up and or stop by. Very important topic tonight. I did some traveling this week. I went up to New York to spend some time with family. We had a funeral and I got back today, but was excited to get back here so that I could be with you guys tonight. Okay, so if you want to see some of what went on the trip, it was an interesting trip. I had to go through DC and then to get to New York. And our plane got delayed and so forth. Anyway, you'll see some of that story if you go to our Instagram and to our TikTok page, which actually brings me, I guess this is a good place to do that. If you've not already done so, go ahead and look at all of our social media platforms. We've got LinkedIn, we've got TikTok, we've got, of course, here on our show, our stream that goes out live every Monday night. And let me switch over because I've got a new little thing that I do for that one. Look at that. That's me. All right. So every Monday night here, we've got our live stream that we do, and we're glad that when you stop by so you can be a part of that. But on our other social media, we've got our Twitter, and then, of course, Buy Me a Coffee. And I'll talk about that in a minute later as we get into the show. So some special things that we have that we're doing over there on Buy Me a Coffee. Of course, our lineup for the week, you've got the live here on Monday. We've got our TikTok on Friday morning, which if you keep an eye out, keep an ear out, we are going to be changing that. We're going to be putting something out on Thursday and on Friday, but we're changing the date on that one. And then, of course, our Twitter that goes out every day. So glad that if you've not already done so, go ahead and do that. If you are watching this live, if you are watching this on the replay, go ahead and let your folks know. Let them know to sign up. Go ahead and like this video that you're seeing right now. Go ahead and share it, right? Give us a thumbs up. We are growing this channel, we're growing this community, and we are excited that you are a part of it. So let's go ahead and why don't we jump right in? So are you hypoglycemic? Are you hypoglycemic? You know, this is something that I see and I hear often as it relates to diabetes. In fact, they say about a little over 62% of people who are diabetic will have at least one hypoglycemic episode in the course of this year, right? Remember, there are 422 million people around the world with diabetes and 37 million people here in the country, in the United States alone, that have diabetes. So we're talking about a great number of people that have hypoglycemia. And hypoglycemia, let's go ahead and give the definition of that term. So hypoglycemia is any blood sugar that is below 70, right? A blood sugar below 70 is considered to be hypoglycemia. And when we talk about severe hypoglycemia, then that's blood sugar that's below 54, right? 54 or lower, actually. So below 70 is hypoglycemia, and then below 54 or lower is what we call severe hypoglycemia. And we make a distinction between those two, and we'll talk about that here in a minute as we get into the show. So hypoglycemia is, once again, when that blood sugar drops, right? So let's talk a little bit about what blood sugars are. What do they do? What did they do in the body? Remember, the body's job is to keep us alive. That's the function. And so the body uses energy to be able to do all the functions that it needs. So breathing, heart beating, digestion, muscles moving, right? Hair growing, skin growing, nails growing. For our women, right? So the whole process of menstrual cycles, right? The body needs energy for that. For our men to develop and to produce sperm. So all of those things require energy in the body. And the energy that the body uses most frequently is glucose, all right? Now, if you think about, here's a good example. So if you go to the gas station, right? And you're sitting at the gas station and you're putting gas into your car. I don't know which one you use. You know, they got the 87 octane, they got the 89 octane, and they got the 93, right? Yeah. And so sometimes I'll kind of make an analogy between the gas that we put in the car and the different things that we use in our body for energy. So they got the 87, 89, and 93. That's the octane of the gas. And in our body, we have fats, proteins, and carbs. And the reason I changed that around a minute ago is because carbs are the most ready source of energy. Let me say it again. Carbs are the most ready source of energy. So for me, it's almost like that 93% octane, right? So the body takes those carbs. It takes those carbs and it converts it to energy. Now, a couple of weeks ago, we talked about the stress response and how the body goes out, produces cortisol and epinephrine. And if you have not already watched that, go ahead and go back to that video and you'll see what I'm talking about. But body goes into itself when something happens and it needs energy. It goes and it breaks down fat, it breaks down protein to generate glucose, and then it takes the glucose, blood sugar, and it converts that into energy, and that's the energy that it uses to function. Okay. So let's simplify it and say, okay, glucose is what the body needs for energy, understanding that there are some other things that we can convert as well. So if the body doesn't have enough glucose, then you can see that a lot of the functions that it needs can begin to shut down. So things that people will experience when they have hypoglycemia are all the things that we would expect to happen if the body is not getting enough energy, right? So things like what? A fast heartbeat, shaking, sweating, nervousness, dizziness, right? Sometimes people can even have some nausea. They can have some nausea. They can have tingling around the mouth. They can have numbness, right? All those things can occur if we have low blood sugar, because the body is not able to get the energy that it needs to function. So as those blood sugars are dropping, all those symptoms begin happening. Now, this is as we get below 70. When we get to 54 and lower, right now we start to get severe hypoglycemia, and some other things begin happening. And this is where the problems come in with mentation. So problems finding your words, right? Maybe even becoming unconscious, right? So those are severe results of low blood sugar. And that's the blood sugar, as we mentioned, 54 is that magic number, right? So below 70, and then 54 is the next number that we do. In fact, when we see patients in our office, if their blood sugar is below 70, we treat it. Right, we give them, and we'll talk about some of the treatment, we'll give them some things to treat it, to bring the blood sugar up before we actually let them go, before we actually let them leave the office, right? Because we want to make sure that they have enough energy on board so that they can do, the body can do the things that it needs to do. So hypoglycemia, that's the definition. Some of the symptoms that we see, right, as a result of hypoglycemia, depending on what level we are, whether it's the 70 or lower, or then 54 or lower than that, which is what we would term severe hypoglycemia. So the question is, what are the causes? What causes hypoglycemia? Now, this is an interesting one, right? Because we often think of hypoglycemia with diabetes, and that is the case, right? So when we talk about diabetes, because of the way we treat diabetes, right, people can have hypoglycemia. So let's talk about that here for a minute. So in diabetes, probably the main cause of having hypoglycemia when we are talking about diabetics, people who are diabetics, is overtreatment. Whether it is taking insulin or it's taking other medications that can cause the body to produce more insulin. So let's talk about that for a minute. So insulin's job is to go into the system, go into your body, and it takes sugar and it facilitates getting that sugar into the cell. And when it takes the sugar out of the blood and into the cell, then the blood sugar goes down, which is what we want, right? Because we want blood sugars to be in the normal range, or at least a range that we've predefined. Usually I tell people if they're waking up in the morning, it should be between 100 and 120. If you read a lot of the organizations and the guidelines, they'll give you a range anywhere from 70 to 180, right? So that's the range that we want, somewhere in there. I usually tell people, let's do it a little tighter. Let's keep it between 100 and 120. Make sense? All right. So that's where we want the blood sugars to be. And so we give medication, insulin, for example, to bring those blood sugars down and keep them in that range. But you can imagine if we have too much insulin, then that insulin has the potential to not only take the blood sugar down into the range 100 to 120 or 70 to 180, depending on what you're using, but now we have the potential for that blood sugar to go even lower than 70. Right? Not because we want, but because we just took too much medication. And then in certain cases, it can actually get way below that. And now we get into those severe hypoglycemic episodes that I described earlier. Right? All right. So that's the hypoglycemia. That's the insulin. There are certain medications called secretagogues that have the function of making your body or helping your body produce more insulin in order to treat the blood sugars, right? So if someone who's not on insulin, they take this medication, usually it's a pill. There are some other ones as well. Usually it's a pill, and that pill helps the body to produce more insulin so that we can control the blood sugars. Ultimately our goal. But once again, those pills, those medications, because they are producing insulin, if we're not careful, then that insulin can also cause low blood sugar, right? Because that's the function of insulin, to lower the blood sugar. All right. So the other thing that can happen is, let's assume that we are taking the amount of medication, the amount of insulin that we are prescribed and that we've come up, say, okay, this is the amount that we are consistently doing, right? Well, the other thing that can cause hypoglycemia when it comes to diabetics is that they can take the amount of insulin, the amount of medication that they need, but not eat the appropriate amount. Now, when I say the appropriate amount, I don't mean that they have to eat a certain amount of food, right? But what I mean is that they usually eat a certain amount because the insulin and the medication is based on blood sugars that result from the food that they eat. So one day they take their medication and they don't eat the same amount of food. Well, the medication was designed for a certain amount of food. And if you have a mismatch between the food that you are eating on a particular day and the amount of medication, insulin and or other medications that you take that lower blood sugars, then the potential is there that you can have a low blood sugar. So sometimes what happens is people take the regular medication, but one day they may delay, right? Something's going on at home, something's going on at work, and they don't eat at the same time. Well, the medication is in there and it's working. And it's expecting that you're going to be eating at a certain time. And if you don't eat at a certain time, the insulin doesn't know that you didn't eat. And so the blood sugars begin dropping, and it drops below what the level is that we want, right? So they're below that 70 as a start. And then if you're not careful, if that gets delayed further and further. So if you normally eat at 12 and then one day you don't eat until 4, right? That blood sugar can be dropping the whole time. And then all of a sudden we end up with a low blood sugar, okay? All right. The other thing that can cause, right, low blood sugar. So we take the medication, say we've eaten the appropriate amount of food, but one day we have more activity than we normally do. Now, notice I didn't say too much activity, but we have more activity than we normally do. So normally you're at home and you're maybe even doing housework, right? Or you're at work, and at work you lift things and you put things up. And this particular day, you have more activity than normal. So you go to work, and instead of doing just your normal lifting and carrying and so forth, somebody's out sick, and you do your work and you do the other person's work. Or you're at home, and normally you're about cleaning the house and maybe even you're working outside in the yard. And then this day you decide, okay, hey, I am going to work outside in the yard, but I also need to run to the grocery store. And you run to the grocery store, and now you're walking around. So that extra activity has the potential for causing low blood sugar. So those are the three main things that I talk to people about when it comes to low blood sugar as it relates to diabetes, right? So too much medication, not enough food, and more activity than normal. And those three, any combination of those three has the potential for lowering blood sugar. So if you know that on a particular day, there's going to be more activity or less food, then you discuss with your healthcare provider, hey, do we need to lower or adjust my medication to compensate, right? Because what we don't want to do, so this is an interesting one, right? So often I have people say, well, I'm eating more because my blood sugars drop. Well, that's almost kind of the opposite of what we want, right? We don't want to force you to eat more food to keep the blood sugar up because of the medication. What we want to do is we want to adjust the medication to fit what you're eating. Now, that's assuming that you are eating a nice, balanced, healthy meal, right? Or meals. So if you're under the calories that we want you to have, then of course your doctor is going to say, hey, we need to increase the calories, okay? So we want to make sure that if everything being equal, let me say it that way, everything being equal, we want to make sure that you are not having to eat to keep blood sugars up because you're on too much medication. So you want to make sure you're adjusting that down, okay? And we'll talk, we'll give a little bit more about that coming up here in a minute. Well, what kind of low blood sugars do people have, and when do they have them? And typically, low blood sugars can occur at any time, but there are some typical times when people will have low blood sugars. Number one, people often have low blood sugars overnight because for one of those three reasons we talked about, and also at nighttime, you're asleep, and so you're less likely to be able to feel when blood sugar is starting to drop. And so people may be asleep, and during the daytime, they feel one of those symptoms that we discussed, and they go and they treat the blood sugar or they check the blood sugar. But if you're asleep, it may take a little longer for your body to realize or alert you that the blood sugar is dropping so that you can wake up, all right? So people will tend to have more low blood sugars at nighttime. The other reason that they have low blood sugars at nighttime is, of course, they're not eating, right? So during the day, a lot of times we snack, we kind of snacking throughout the day. So we don't notice that the blood sugars are low or lower because we're always putting in carbs. And as we said, carbs are what the body uses to raise the blood sugar when we eat them, And so at nighttime, if you're sleeping, particularly if you're having a good night's sleep, right? And remember, as we talk about in all of our shows, we recommend at least 7 hours, right? So if you're getting 7, 8 hours, that's 7 or 8 hours that you're sleeping, that you're not eating. And if that's the case, if you've not done a good job of matching insulin or medication with food, with activity, then overnight, because you're not eating anything, the blood sugar can drop, okay? So those are two of the main ones, right? So nighttime hypoglycemia. Other time that people can have low blood sugar is a lot of times they'll have blood sugars after they eat. And this often has to do with a mismatch between the food and the medication that they're taking, particularly insulin, right? Because you go and you're eating and you say, hey, this looks like, I don't know, 10 units of insulin, the food that we're eating, right? This looks like it's going to take 10 units of insulin. And so you eat the food and you take the 10 units of insulin, but the food actually requires 8 units. Guess what? So now the potential for going low is there as well, okay? So those are some other times, when people can have low blood sugar. Another interesting one is after exercising, particularly if we're doing aerobic exercising, right? So running, jumping, skipping, so forth. Because as you're exercising, the body is burning sugar, right? The body's burning sugar. So when you stop, the body, it takes a little bit for the body to catch up, say, okay, she stopped or he stopped now. Or if you've been going for at a good clip, right? Then you're burning. And when you finish exercising, your exercising muscles don't stop immediately. And so if you're not careful, if you end up eating the same amount of food, taking the same amount of medication, because you've had this extra activity, which we want, by the way, right? We want you to exercise, then you can have low blood sugars then as well, right? So those are 3 at a time. So at nighttime, after meals, and often after exercising, particularly if we're doing aerobic exercising. Okay. And so those are some interesting times. So that's low blood sugar was the definition, why that can happen sometimes, and specific times when that can happen. And you know, as we talk about low blood sugars, as I mentioned, most often people think of low blood sugars when it comes to diabetes. But we're going to talk about in a minute that it doesn't have to be related to diabetes. Let's see who's there. We've got Dr. Charmaine. Hey, Dr. Charmaine. Charmaine Wood. Hey, good evening. How are you? Glad that you are out there. Welcome to the show. Let's give her. Yeah. Well, welcome. All right. So, as you know, so let's pivot for a minute away from diabetes, and we'll come back to the whole hypoglycemia. So there are other times when people can have hypoglycemia that are unrelated to diabetes. Number one is people can have hypoglycemia when they become ill. And this is a combination of reasons, right? Number one, often when people are ill, they may not eat as much. And if they're not eating as much, they begin losing weight, right? Remember, the body is using our food as fuel for energy to get blood sugars up. So if we're not putting anything in, the body has to go and get food, energy, from the liver, as we talked about before. So it breaks down the stored sugar that we have there called glycogen. It goes to the muscles and it begins breaking the muscles down. And if we have a prolonged illness, then the stores in the body can become depleted. And if we're depleting the stores that we have in the body still needs energy. And particularly when we're ill, it actually needs more energy to generate and to do the things it needs to do in terms of recovery. And so if we're not careful, then we can begin having hypoglycemia. So it's not uncommon for someone who has had a prolonged illness to begin having hypoglycemic episodes, right? Not because they're on insulin, not because, for the diabetes related, not because they're on medications that's lowering it, but because of their physiology and because of where their conditions are. So illness. The other thing that can cause hypoglycemia is if someone has liver disease. As I mentioned before, the liver is the organ more than any other organ that stores a lot of our energy and converts other things to energy. You remember a couple of weeks ago, we talked about the body breaking down fats and protein, and those things go to the liver, and the liver is the place where those are converted to sugar. And so if we have liver disease and the mechanisms for the liver that are responsible for generating energy, generating carbs, not carbs, but generating glucose as a result of breaking other things down, if that is compromised, then someone can have hypoglycemia related to that. We can have hypoglycemia in some of our athletes. And this typically comes as we see some of our female athletes. So our gymnasts, right? Because they have to maintain very lean, low weight for what they do. And so they don't have a lot of fat stores. So if they're not eating on a regular basis, then we can find that they have hypoglycemia, once again, similar to what we just talked about in terms of the illness, because the body doesn't have those stores. And because it doesn't have the stores, and they're out there, I mean, if you've seen some gymnasts, they are doing a pretty intense workout, right? And so they can be prone to have hypoglycemic episodes as well. And once again, that's unrelated to diabetes. There are certain conditions, right, where people are not eating, or they're eating and they may have some other medical issue like bulimia, right, or anorexia. And so in those cases, those patients, they may be eating and then purging, or they may not be eating. They may be cutting their calories to a very severe or low state, and then they can begin developing hypoglycemia as a result of that. Okay. There are certain tumors, right? An insulinoma, tumors in the body that are producing too much insulin. Now, we know that type 2 diabetes is an insulin-resistant disease, or the mechanism of action is insulin resistance. And those patients will have a higher level of insulin that is naturally produced by the pancreas, right? So that's a natural process because of, we believe, obesity and weight gain and so forth. But you can also have a tumor that is in the body, can be in the pancreas, sometimes it's other places, and the tumor is producing insulin regardless of what's going on around it. So it's not that the blood sugars are high and the body is saying, hey, we need more insulin. That tumor, called an insulinoma, is producing too much insulin, and that insulin, what does it do? Well, the job of the insulin is to bring blood sugar down. And so now we can have hypoglycemia as a result of this tumor. The other group of people that can have hypoglycemia, these are people who've had bariatric surgery or some weight loss surgery. Let me put it that way, because it can be a combination of, the traditional or banding and so forth. Several reasons can happen there. One, say someone they're doing this for weight loss, right? And all of a sudden we've restricted the amount of sugar or amount of food that they can consume at one time. So the amount that they can take in is lower, but their body is still making the elevated insulin that we talked about before because of insulin resistance. And they may not even be diabetic. But because now we're putting in less fuel when we still have the same amount of insulin that's produced, then that person can be prone to having hypoglycemia. The other one that's related to patients who are on or who've had weight loss surgery is what we call kind of a dumping syndrome. Dumping syndrome. And dumping syndrome says, normally you eat food and the food goes into your stomach and then it gets digested over time. During that same time, insulin comes out and the insulin pairs with the food. So there's some food there, there's some insulin there, and the two of them are working together to lower blood sugars, right? And so that kind of is a normal process of bringing the blood sugar down. Well, with some weight loss surgery, the food comes in, and because we've changed the anatomy of the digestive system, the food that's there doesn't stay. It comes out really quickly because now the stomach, the intestine, the GI tract is shorter. So where it would take a longer time for that food to get through, now it goes through very quickly. But guess what? The insulin that the body made is still there. And so the food is gone, but now the insulin is working. And so you can have hypoglycemia as a result of that. And then the one that we get a lot of patients, I shouldn't say a lot of patients, we get patients referred to us because of this, is what's called reactive hypoglycemia. Reactive hypoglycemia. And reactive hypoglycemia takes into account what I just described with the weight loss surgery, but these are people that have not had weight loss surgery. What happens is they eat food and the blood sugars begin to spike. And the insulin comes out, as it should, to compensate for the higher blood sugar, to treat the higher blood sugar, to bring it down. But the insulin overshoots for some reason the blood sugar. So it should have put out, 5 units of insulin, 2 units of insulin, 1 unit of insulin. Instead of putting out that much, it puts out a larger amount. And so the insulin overshoots the sugar or the glucose that's there, and the blood sugar the blood sugar begins going down, but the insulin doesn't go away right away. And so as a result of that, now we have hypoglycemia. And this typically occurs 2 hours. I was going to say 1.5 to 2 hours, but about 2 hours on average after someone eats a high carb load, a high carb amount of food. So you ate a bowl of pasta, you ate pizza, you had ice cream, right? You had a sandwich. And so those patients, because of the carb that's in their food, then the blood sugar goes up. And the blood sugar goes up, the insulin comes up, and they now have an overshoot of that insulin, and they can have hypoglycemia. And so these are folks who they have the same kind of symptoms, right? So they're shaky, they're sweaty, they're clammy, they maybe feel anxious. Okay. Now, a lot of times people will have symptoms of hypoglycemia, and they'll say to me, and I felt nervous. And the reason that they equate those two is because when hypoglycemia happens, the body produces glucagon, and glucagon is a hormone that the body uses to raise blood sugar. And the way it raises blood sugar is it goes to the liver, and it tells the liver to break down the stores of sugar that's there, glycogen, and convert it to sugar, right? So it says, hey, I know you got some stuff in the liver that you're holding on to. I need you to now just break that down and give me the active sugar so that I can bring this blood sugar up. So it releases glucagon, and it also releases epinephrine. And what is epinephrine, we said? We said epinephrine is that stress hormone, okay? And so all the things that you will feel during stress are some of the symptoms that you feel during hypoglycemia. And so that's why people will say, hey, I feel a little nervous, because the symptoms can seem the same, right? Because some of the same hormones are in play, and you'll have the same kind of feeling, okay? Very, very good. So reactive hypoglycemia is the other one. And so that's a list of things that can happen. And notice that's a pretty long list, right? Of reasons that someone can have hypoglycemia that have absolutely nothing to do with diabetes. Also, some people who are on dialysis, people who have kidney disease, right? Because there is, the kidney is responsible for a lot of the sugar management in our body. And if the kidneys aren't functioning well, then people can be prone to have hypoglycemic episodes. All right. Let's take a break and let's do some station identification. Right. We talked about this a little while. Once again, thank you if you're out there. If you have not already done so, go ahead and look us up on our social media platform: LinkedIn, TikTok, of course, Twitter, and here is our newest little graphic for our show here on Monday night. Dwayne Wood, MD, health and wellness talk exclusive here on our channel. For all of our lineup for the week, you'll see that there are live starting on Monday. We've got our TikTok that's coming out at the end of the week. As I mentioned, we will change that, but you keep an ear for that. And then our Twitter. And then we are so excited that we have our coaching program that's there, DwayneWoodMD.com. And if you go there, you can sign up for a consult. And one of the other things that I want to just mention in this, and I'm going to go ahead and grab, I'm going to see if I can bring up our screen here so you can see. Oh, okay, here we are. All right, so we've mentioned that we have some new things that are coming, and this is one of those. I don't think I'm on the screen, but that's okay. You see a picture of me. This is our exclusive membership program, right? This is our membership program, and this you'll find over at buymeacoffee.com/DwayneWoodMD/membership, and you will also see a link for that in our show notes, right? And so these memberships allow you to have some exclusive access to some material, to some extra perks, and some access to me, right? So there are 3 levels. There's the starter pack, the starter level there, and you'll see that one shows up at $6 per month. It allows you to, of course, support our channel. It allows you to unlock exclusive posts and messaging, shout out on our show here, right, for your support. And then you get a virtual 15-minute meetup with me, all right, 15-minute meetup with me, and discuss something that's on your mind. We've got our $25 per month membership fee. You get everything that you saw before, and then this one allows an upgrade to a 30-minute virtual coaching assessment, right, based on our coaching platform that we have. We've talked about life coaching. We've talked about our coaching for diabetes management. That's coaching beyond the disease, And then and that's our learner, right? So we have our starter, we have our learner at $25. And then for $50 a month, you get everything that you saw before, but you get an upgraded service. You get an exclusive 60-minute coaching session with me. 60-minute coaching session with me. Our coaching sessions are typically right around $300, so $297. Okay, $297. And our coaching packages, you'll see those on our website, but this allows you to get a free 60-minute coaching session with me, either for life coaching, diabetes coaching, and all the other things that you saw in our earlier packages, right? So this allows us to do that. We're very excited about that new offering that we have in addition to our coaching program, right? So if you are here, if you're out there, if you have family and friends that you think will benefit from this service, go ahead and do that. Send them over, and you will see that in our show notes. That you can get to buymeacoffee.com and sign up for one of our exclusive membership packages. That's $6 a month, $25 a month, and $50 a month, which gives you some additional benefits, and then of course the access to me for the coaching evaluation or the meetup, right, to discuss something that's on your mind. Awesome. All right, so now let's get back to our hypoglycemia. So the question then becomes, what do we do? Right? So that's ultimately it. So we have hypoglycemia. We know what it is. We know what it feels like. So what do we do about hypoglycemia? And we're going to go through this in kind of the similar order that we just talked about, starting with diabetes and then so forth. So for our patients who have diabetes, the very, very first thing that I want to say is you got to know what your blood sugar is. Pause for effect. Right? You got to know what the blood sugar is, because I tell people blood sugars don't go from 180 down to 40. They don't go from 180 down to 70. All right, you're like, what are you talking about? Of course they do. Well, no, they go from 180 to 185. To 180 to 175, 174. 170, 165, 160, 155, right? So the blood sugar is dropping. And what our goal is to catch the blood sugar somewhere between where it is and before it gets down to the low blood sugar. And if we are checking and paying attention to blood sugars, we can actually catch it before it gets down to below 70. And certainly before it gets down to below 54, right? So knowing what your blood sugars are, checking the blood sugars, that's so important because that is the first thing that we have access to be able to avoid, right? To be able to avoid having hypoglycemia. Because if you know it, you can treat it. First thing. The other thing is to make sure that if you are on medication, if you're diabetic, that you have a regular planned meal plan. Regular planned meal plan. Right? Use that word there twice. Right? So a regular scheduled meal plan. How about that? So that you know, okay, I take my medication at this interval and I eat at this interval. Because remember, anytime you delay or decrease the amount of food that you eat, then you have the potential for having hypoglycemia. So if you're checking the blood sugars and you know when the blood sugars are dropping, and you have a regular scheduled meal plan and you're getting the food in on time, then that helps to decrease hypoglycemia. The third one is anticipate what you're going to do. So if you are going to have times during the week, during the day, where you know that you're going to be exerting more energy, more activity, exercising, more than you normally do, then talk to your healthcare provider about coming up with a plan for medication on the days when you do the things that we know are going to expend more energy. That way you are being prophylactic. You are anticipating that those blood sugars are going to change and you are compensating for that. But remember, if you keep taking the same amount of medication and your activity goes up and or you eat less, then the blood sugars are going to go down. Going back to eating for a minute, if you are on a diet, right? So you are changing, you're trying to be healthier, you're changing the type of food that you're eating, right? Those changes, which are good, can have effects in terms of blood sugar. So if all of a sudden, you used to eat a lot more carbs, okay? Let's take that for example. You used to eat a lot more carbs and you are trying to control your diet. And now the blood sugars are better because you've cut back on the carbs or you're eating more complex carbs, and we won't get into that part of it. But if the blood sugars are lower, you can't take the same amount of medication. Because if you do, guess what? That's right, we're going to have low blood sugars. So talk to your healthcare provider about adjusting that. So number one, check your blood sugars. Number two, make sure you're having regular scheduled meal plan. Number three, if you're having more activity, anticipate that and work with your healthcare provider about adjusting medication. Okay? That's for diabetes. The other thing in terms of diabetes is, people say, well, how often should I check my blood sugar? Well, if you're prone to hypoglycemia, you may have to check blood sugars more than someone who does not have hypoglycemia. Is that fair? No, it's not. But guess what? That's what you got to do, right? It's because you have to pay more attention to your blood sugars. So some people, they want to check their blood sugar in the morning and they don't want to check it anymore. Well, if your blood sugar is dropping through the day, now you've eaten and you've taken your medicine at night and you go to sleep, we said 7 to 8 hours you're sleeping and you're not eating anything. Now you're going to be prone to having low blood sugar. So one of the other things to do is to make sure that you check your blood sugar at nighttime before you go to bed. If you're prone to low blood sugars at night, then do that. If you exercise and you're prone to low blood sugars, then you've got to check as well, right? One of the beautiful things that has come along, that helps with this is the continuous glucose monitor. Because the continuous glucose monitor checks blood sugars every 5 minutes or so. Right? And it allows you, remember I talked about, that blood sugar dropping from 180 to 170 to 175 and so forth. Well, guess what? The continuous glucose monitor is there to help you know what the blood sugars are. And that way you don't have to go out and check actively, right? You don't have to go prick your finger to know where the blood sugars are, right? Because you have this device that not only gives you the number, it alerts you. They say, hey, your blood sugars are dropping. Well, that's what I love about those, right? If you guys remember, I did a video. I was actually on air. This was back in December. I'll put one of the show notes there. I'll put it in the description, and I'll put a card. But I was actually on air when my blood sugar started dropping, and I actually recorded that, and you can actually go watch that video to see, and I actually showed my Dexcom, my continuous monitor, as it was changing and going up. Okay, all right. So those are some things that you can do. Let's go and let's talk about some of these other non-diabetes related hypoglycemic times and what we can do. And we won't go through all of them, but let's talk about some of the major ones. Let's talk, number one, about illness. When you are ill, you want to make sure that you are discussing with your healthcare provider, or if you have a family member that's ill, talk with the healthcare provider about what do we do. Mom, dad, cousin, aunt, sister, brother, child, they're ill and they're not eating as much and they're losing weight, right? And that we may have to do something in the way of treating them, right? So a lot of times they'll use the nutritional shakes, right, to get calories in, right, so that the person doesn't have this constant weight loss, right, and leading to hypoglycemia. For patients who have had weight loss surgery, and for patients who have reactive hypoglycemia, let's talk about reactive hypoglycemia first. We tell those patients that they've got to have frequent, low carb, high protein meals. Frequent, low carb, high protein meals. And this is important because it is a behavioral thing. We don't have a simple way of treating reactive hypoglycemia. Sometimes if we have people put on a little bit weight, that can resolve it. Sometimes if we have people lose a little weight, that can resolve it, right? Because it can go, we're not sure what exactly is causing that in that particular individual. There is some medication that we use that slows the absorption of sugar. Because remember, we said when you eat the high carb load, so when you eat that pasta or the pizza or cake or candy or whatever it is, the blood sugar spikes up. And then the insulin comes out to match it. So if we can blunt the amount of absorption that we have of the sugar, then we don't have as big a spike on the insulin. And if we don't have that great spike, then we don't have the blood sugars dropping as much. Okay, so there are some medications. Of course, all medications have some issues with them, but that's one that we can use as well. But eating the frequent, right, and frequent because you're able to put some food, from fuel, if you will, into the body, on a scheduled rotation, so that you're not going long periods of time between eating, because that can cause the low blood sugars. So frequent low carb, and the reason for the low carb is that we said that carbs are the things that cause the spike in blood sugar, resulting in the spike of insulin, which causes the overshoot of the insulin and causes the low blood sugar. So if we don't put in as many carbs, then we don't have as big a spike in the insulin, and so that decreases the low blood sugars, right? So frequent, low carb, and then high protein. And the reason for the high protein is that the protein can be converted to carbs or to energy, right? When we break proteins down, we get those amino acids, and the amino acids get converted. Well, those amino acids are fuel. And so we can have a source of fuel that's going in that doesn't cause a spike in the blood sugar like we see with the high carbs, right? So frequent low carb, high protein meals is what we often tell people. And many of our patients who have followed that regimen, I said many, but most of them have had success. Now, talking about the patients who've had weight loss surgery. So weight loss surgery gets a little interesting because it is sometimes difficult to get to the point where we're matching or figuring out the food that people are eating, right? The food that people are eating, how long it's going to stay. But it's something that we continue to work on. And the reason I was pairing it with the reactive hypoglycemia is we tell those people the same thing, right? So frequent low carb, high protein meal. And frequent, first of all, because they can't eat as much, right? So they have to be able to, and you don't want to force them to eat a big meal, because now they get into other trouble, right? Other problems. Because if you've had weight loss surgery and all of a sudden you're trying to pack it in, then you get abdominal pain, you get indigestion, and it's not a pretty situation to be in. Okay, so frequent low carb, high protein meals will help to stabilize that as well. Okay, and then one of the things that we don't talk a lot about but it's so important, is the use of rescue medication for low blood sugars. The use of rescue medication for low blood sugars. Now, let's talk about treating hypoglycemia, right? And we've talked about some situations that some things you can do in those situations. Well, let's talk about our diabetics. Well, all of them in general, but specifically diabetics. We want to use the rule of 14 or 15. I said 14. The rule of 15s. And the rule of 15 says that you eat 15 grams of fast-acting carbs. So 15 grams of fast-acting carbs if the blood sugars are low. And fast-acting carbs are juice, candy, and the sugar tablets, right? Glucose tablets, glucose gels, all of those things. So 15 grams of that. You don't want to, people say, well, I'm going to go and I'm going to make a sandwich and I'm going to eat that. Well, depends on where the blood sugar is and so forth. But if you're treating hypoglycemia and you're not about to eat, we want to use fast-acting carbs. You don't want to use diet soda and juice in this situation, right? So 15 grams of carbs. The glucose tablets that you can get are either 3 or 4 milligrams of glucose. So if you're going to use that to treat hypoglycemia, then you need to have either 4 or 5 of those, right? Sometimes people will take one and they say, well, my blood sugar didn't change. Well, it's not going to change because you don't have enough. You don't have enough carbs there. So 15 grams of carbs. And then you wait 15 minutes. 15 grams of carbs. You wait 15 minutes, you check the blood sugar again, and if the blood sugar has not changed, or it is not changing fast enough, or is not where we want it to be, then you ingest another 15 grams of carbs. And then you wait another 15 minutes, right? So that's the rule of 15. 15 grams of carbs, you wait 15 minutes, and then you check it again, and then if it's not where you want it to be, then you take another 15 grams of carbs, okay? So let's go through the carbs again. So 4 ounces of juice is about 15 grams of carbs. So if you got one of those 8-ounce juice bottles or boxes or whatever, that's more than 15 grams of carbs. And then if you take too many carbs, then you run the risk of overshooting, and now we have got to deal with the high blood sugars, right? So we want to treat it just enough to get it up without overshooting. That's usually the plan, right? Those of you who are out there who've had hypoglycemia, right? You know what it feels like. And sometimes when you're in the middle of the hypoglycemia, you want to just take everything in, right? You just want to shovel it in until the feeling goes away, right? And you'll see that on the video that I did, that I talked about that yeah, I was feeling, I just want to eat. I think what was I eating? Skittles, I think, right? So you want to shovel it in, but we want to make sure that you're doing the 15 grams of carbs, wait 15 minutes, and then check it again, okay? So 4 ounces of juice. If you're going to use like milk, it is skim milk or 1%, right? And you want to use 8 ounces of that. Candy, you got to look at the wrapper to see how pieces of candy is 15 grams. Of course, the glucose tablets, like we talked about, 3 to 4 grams per tablet. And so you want to use 4 or 5 of those. And then the glucose gel. That one, you've got to look at the bottle or at the tube to see how much that is. Now, here's something, right? Suppose you're at home, right? You don't have any juice. You don't have any glucose tablets. What do? Well, if you have sugar at home, right? 4 or 5 tablespoons of sugar in water. Drink it, or if you don't want to do that, just take the sugar, put it in your mouth, right? Because what we want is the sugar. We want to have that fast-acting sugar, right? It doesn't have to be the things I described. If you don't have that at home, you can't use that, right? Cake icing, right? If you are at a place where there's cake icing, use that. Do you know what also has sugar? Toothpaste. I know, yeah. Have you ever watched your blood sugar go up after you brush your teeth? Why does it do that? Because there's sugar in the toothpaste, right? So that's not ideal, right? You don't want to just squirting down toothpaste. But if you don't have anything around you, right, you use what you have. And then you want to also eat something that will help stabilize the blood sugar. So take in some protein, take in some carbs, okay? And And so, so we got an interesting question. I'll hold on to that one here. All right. Okay, so we're talking about that. Okay, so reactive hypoglycemia, how do we treat it? And then the other thing that we have is glucagon. So glucagon is an emergency kit that we have that we use for low blood sugars. And glucagon is usually 1 milligram of glucagon. And once I say again, like I said, glucagon goes into the body, and glucagon tells the system that we want to go in and begin breaking down our glycogen stores and converting that to sugar so that we can use that. Okay, does that make sense so far? Awesome. All right, let's see. I think I have a question here that I'm going to pop up, or a comment actually. Let's see. DM says, I'm a professional pet sitter, and when I'm walking a lot of dogs, I have frequent drops in my blood sugar. Then I freak out and I overeat. Yeah. So DM, that is so true, right? Because as I said just a minute ago, when you're having the symptom, and I'll tell you guys, so I treat diabetes, right? That's what I do all day. I treat diabetes every day. And I am a diabetic myself. And when I have a low blood sugar, even though I know, right, what I'm telling you right now, the temptation is sometimes to just eat until the feeling goes away, right? And so I have in my mind what 15 grams of carbs are and what they look like, okay? And so if you have a problem with that, go ahead and pre-package what you're going to use for low blood sugar, right? Take out the glucose tablets and put them in a baggie, right? Parcel them out in 3 or 4 tablets, so that when you are in the situation, you don't have to decide, right? So you just grab one of the bags, you take that, and you say, okay, I know that's 15. And then you're more likely to follow that. When you get juice, don't get the 8 ounces, get the 4-ounce juice boxes, right? And put them in the refrigerator, right? Put them back there so that if I have low blood sugar, I can just grab one of those. And that's my 15 grams of carbs. I keep wanting to say 14, right? Does that make sense? But yeah, so D, I feel you, right? When that's happening, you want to just gorge and eat it. But try some of those prepackaged things like I talked about, and you'll see that will help you be able to manage those a little bit better. Okay, all right. So guys, let's go ahead and let's have our thought for today. All right. So our thought for today has to do with self-confidence. Self-confidence. We talked several weeks ago about one of the reasons why people don't do the things that they should do. And one of those reasons was what other people thought. And what other people think about us goes directly to our self-confidence. And often, we are, for some reason, not sure of the things that we want to do or need to do. This weekend, when I was traveling, I was home and I was talking to my brothers and sisters. And I was telling them a story about me, about when I was in college. When I was in college, I was a pretty active guy. And I was actually a theology major at the time. And I had a situation that happened that really caused me to doubt whether I wanted to pursue and maintain my degree and my studies in theology. And the situation happened, but here's what I found. As I think back to that day, as I think back to that time, the things I was trying to do were things that I had not been taught yet. I want you to listen to me. The things I was trying to do were things I had not been taught yet. And so I was trying to do something with skills that I did not yet acquire. And so a lot of times what we see as us not being able to do something is because we've not learned that yet. So we think that thing is so grand, that thing is so big, that thing is so tremendous, that thing is so hard. But guess what? You've not learned how to do it yet. And so how do we overcome that? We overcome that by getting knowledge. We overcome that by learning and being able to talk to people around us who are doing the things that we want to do. Now, self-confidence. When we have self-confidence, it's not a cocky, I can do anything attitude. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the confidence in yourself that if you have the knowledge and if you have the support, you can accomplish anything. Right? So as you think about yourself, it may be that something happened in the past that shook your self-confidence. You were in a play, you had to do a public speaking, somebody told you couldn't talk. You have a lisp, right? You're worried about how you look. You're worried about so many different things. And so you have taken a hit in how you perceive yourself and how you think people perceive you. That can cause self-confidence, problems with self-confidence. Okay. You know what I do? And my wife, she talks about me all the time, but that's okay. Right. You know, when I'm done, I watch my videos and I'll sit and I'll watch them over and over and over and over. And I'm not watching because, I'm cocky about it. I'm watching to see, okay, what did I do there? Okay. How do I improve that? What did I say that? How did I explain that properly? Right. You guys see that I talk with my hands, right? That's what I do. Right. And at one time I tried, right, to keep my hands down and I would sit and I would talk and like that. You know what that does to me? That decreases my energy, right? My energy goes away, right? So I talk with my hands and that's me, right? I don't try, hit people in their face with my hands, but that's me, right? I used to worry because when I talk, and you guys may watch it, I'll tell all my little secrets right now, right? Sometimes my mouth, as I'm talking, it goes off to one side, right? So I'm almost like I'm talking out the side of my mouth over here, right? And I used to try to, right, keep my mouth in the front, and it was just the most awkward thing that I did, right? The part of that is accepting who you are for what you are. You are who you are. What you have is what you got. We try to improve that, right? But that is who you are. And we are out here, me, right? The people who are around you, we want to see you. We don't want to see the pretend you. We want to see the you, right? And then finally, self-confidence sometimes doesn't come because we've not tried things. We've not tried enough things. It's kind of like giving my wife flowers, and I'm getting in trouble here, but that's okay, right? Give my wife flowers. So if the only time I give her flowers is on Valentine's Day, or only time I give her a card, only time I tell her I love her is on Valentine's Day, then Valentine's Day becomes, right, this awe-inspiring thing. And if anything happens bad on Valentine's Day, then everything goes crazy, everything goes bad. But if I'm giving her flowers and I'm telling her, honey, I'm gonna have to give you some flowers, by the way, okay? And I'm telling her I love her on a daily basis, right? The one time when something happens, goes wrong, when I'm telling her I love her on flowers, then it's not as big a deal because it's something that I do. So if you're only trying one thing, right? You tried one thing now, and then 5 years from now, you try something else. Self-confidence is not going to come. You need to be trying something every day, every week, every month, right? And so self-confidence is built on, let me say the word. Self-confidence is built on knowing that you overcame the mistake. You overcame something that you did wrong, and you kept trying, right? And you begin succeeding. So sometimes we don't have self-confidence because we don't try. And we say we can't try because we don't have self-confidence. But self-confidence sometimes comes as we work. So my challenge to you is, one, to accept who you are, the gifts that you have, the quirkiness that you have, right? That's you. If you've not learned a skill, don't take that to destroy or to derail your self-confidence. Learn the skill. Because when you learn the skill, guess what? You're confident. And then finally, you got to be out there trying things. You've got to be expanding your mind. You're reading and interacting with people and traveling, and all those things bring self-confidence. So work on yours this week. That's our challenge. So work on yours this week. Oh, okay. I hit the wrong. So let's go back to our chat. So Dr. Charmaine says, sometimes I feel like my blood sugar is low, but whenever I have checked it, it's normal. Why is that? That's a good question, Dr. Charmaine. So one of the things that I didn't mention is that it is possible to feel the symptoms of low blood sugar, even though the blood sugar is not low, for several reasons. Number one, if you are a diabetic and your blood sugars have been very, very high, when we now control those blood sugars into the normal or close to the normal range, or even sometimes above the normal range, but lower than they were, then people will feel the symptoms of hypoglycemia, even though the actual number is not low. And that's because their bodies are used to having so high a blood sugar that when they get lower, then it has the same kind of, it almost feels like, the body sends out the epinephrine and so forth, and all those symptoms come. But that is a matter of being able to spend time in lower blood sugar so that the body becomes used to it. Okay. And there's a whole process that we go through there. The other thing is that sometimes blood sugars don't cause the symptoms because they're actually low, but because they change rapidly. So someone can go from a blood sugar of, just pick some random numbers, say 150 down to, 140, right? And so if they do that lower from 150 to 140, let's pick another, 150 to 110. So if they go from 150 to 110 over the course of 2-3 hours, then they never know. But if they go from 150 to 110 within the next, 15, 20 minutes, now that feels like it's a problem. Not because the actual lower number, the 110, is low, but because of the swiftness with which it goes. Okay? The other thing that can happen for some people is if someone has insulin resistance, right? So their insulin is just a little higher than normal, right? Then they can have symptoms of hypoglycemia because the blood sugars are changing, right? Even though they don't have an actual low number. So that's another one. And then finally, if people have not eaten, right? So then this gets into a whole bigger discussion, which we won't have here. But if someone has not eaten, they've gone for a long period of time, say they're doing intermittent fasting, right? If they are not eating the full amount of calories when they do eat, then they can have symptoms of hypoglycemia, even though the blood sugars are not actually low. Okay. So those are some reasons there. Thanks for that question. And then she says, I love flowers. All right, love. I will make sure that I get you some flowers. All right. Awesome. Well, guys, thank you so much for being here. I am always excited when I'm on this show. As I was coming back today, I was tired. I said, no, I got to get back because I want to get on the show because I love what I do. I love talking with you guys. I love educating. I love empowering. I love encouraging you to take charge of your health and to move and your life and to move to the next level, right? Because we want to avoid complications. We want to live fulfilling lives. That's why we do what we do, right? It's not just about controlling blood sugars and controlling thyroid. Ultimately, we want fulfilling lives. And if we can do that, If we can be a part of that, we love it. Okay. So thank you for being here. This is Dr. Dwayne Wood from Diabetes and Endocrine Wellness Center, educating, empowering, and encouraging you to go to the next level. Let's get some music and let's get out of here. And we will see you next week at the next show.